The events of the past week have renewed the focus on President Bashar al-Assad and the civil war in Syria. We wanted to better understand the evolution of the war and the different sides with a stake in the fighting. Last week, I sat down with Gayle Tzemach Lemmon from the Council on Foreign Relations. We began by going back to 2011, when demonstrators took to the streets in protest of the Assad regime. The protests in Syria initially began, those peaceful demonstrations initially began because of the treatment of some boys or young men in Syria who had basically spray painted graffiti in support of the Arab Spring. What happened to those young men?
And they were, savaged by the regime, right? And the families of those boys, I mean, how would you react, right? And so what you saw, then you saw protests grow and grow, and then you saw the crackdown that matched the protests, and then they started to spread. And, then 5 years later, you get to a point where nobody can remember how they started, but the carnage everyone remembers, right? But it started with parents who were upset at what happened to their children who simply spray painted on a wall.
What about life for Syrians at this point? What were they discontent with specifically with respect to even just the policies of the Assad regime? Obviously, they were protesting the violence against these boys, but what else were they upset with?
Sure. I mean, I think it was not so different in some ways from what you saw across the Middle East, right? Protesting for democratic values, protesting for the right to free speech, protesting for the right to free assembly, protesting for freedom and independence, and a government that would allow those things. And you see where that ends, because this was not ever a government that was going to tolerate that, ever.
So tell me about Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria. Where does he get his support?
Well, he gets his support from the minority community from which he comes, which is also supported by Iran. And so it is a minority that has ruled for decades, and really it is not that everybody within that minority is so pro-Assad, but they're also very fearful of what would come if he were not in power. And Iran has helped, and if you want to look at the Syrian civil war and all of the players who've now entered this, all on the side of the Syrian regime is all in Iran and all in Russia, but Iran was there from the start.
Why is Russia interested in Syria?
Russia has long seen Syria as part of its domain, right? And if you look at Russian assets now, the only port on the Mediterranean that Russia has is in Syria. Syria has long been an ally, and it also sees Syria as part of its re-emergence in a greater way on the global stage.
You mentioned Iran. What kind of support are we talking about for Bashar al-Assad? In what way are they providing support?
So people and fighters, weaponry, right? What you would need to prosecute a war successfully. They have been unhesitating and really all in terms of supporting Bashar al-Assad. They have no intention of letting his government fall. And on the other side, you had these peaceful democratic protesters who did they have on their side, right? And then you had a Free Syrian Army that came up, Syrian rebel groups, and then it became a number of competing rebel groups on the other side that were nowhere near as organized as the forces that were aligned with the regime.
Do those rebel groups have outside help as well?
Absolutely, right? So the Gulf states are helping on some sides, Turkey is helping on the others, but there's always the challenge has been to find a consensus that wasn't extremist. And so the fear that was always inside the Obama administration was, are we going to arm the next Al-Qaeda? Are we going to arm the next extremist group? How do we know who these people are?
I think for folks watching some of these images is the thing that they're wondering is, why would Bashar al-Assad want to kill his own people?
It sends a message to those who might not necessarily want to live under the Assad regime that we will win. We will win, so come with us now. There's no question that the regime is going to win. This is the price you will pay if you oppose us, and you don't want to end up like this. And there's no question that it sends that message in the most devastating way possible.
So President Obama talked about a red line.
A red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
that suggested the United States would take action. What happened?
Well, then that red line was crossed. And then came the summer of 2013, when there was a discussion about would the U.S. pursue airstrikes against Syrian regime targets. I mean, target lists were ready. And the truth was that as much as people want to pin the lack of airstrikes or the decision not to pursue airstrikes on solely the Obama administration, there was so little appetite for it on Capitol Hill. So in the end, at a press conference, right, it came this idea. Well, could there be an agreement on getting rid of chemical weapons? It allowed Russia to save face, allowed the Americans to say that they had, gotten something, and it allowed everybody to move forward and show the world, see, we're doing something about this while not pursuing a military option. It got the weapons, out of use, at least in theory, and it let everybody go on to the next fight. And then comes ISIS, which fully takes attention away from the Syrian regime. So, in the summer of 2014, when Mosul falls, the end of Assad must go came, in the summer of 2014 when Mosul fell. Because Assad was then seen as, if not an ally, certainly in the fight against ISIS, then the lesser of the evils. And Assad must go. The de facto policy became, he can kind of stay for now.
So as the Obama administration kept its attention on ISIS, what was Bashar al-Assad doing, and how was that affecting his own people?
He was absolutely making the most of the fact that ISIS grabbed attention and seized headlines. And I remember a Syria watcher telling me once, when we were having this long conversation, said, the problem is that ISIS is the symptom, not the cancer. Assad is the cancer, but you guys are never going to go after that because you have no more stomach for regime change, right? And you have no more stomach to be sure of what is going to come afterward, after Libya. So we feel pretty sure that now you guys are just going to focus, you guys being the Americans, are just going to focus on ISIS, and you're making a mistake.